Sonic the Hedgehog, a gaming icon, a legend. Since June 23rd, 1991, the blue blur has been introduced to multiple generations of gamers from the then 16-bit era of the Mega Drive, Genesis in the States, to the 120-bit era with the Dreamcast, and then to being a multi-console star from the Xbox 360, PS3, and the Nintendo GameCube, and to the successors of those respective consoles. He's had 3 comic series, from Fleetway's Sonic the Comic, to Archie's Sonic the Hedgehog, to now IDW's Sonic the Hedgehog. He's been a TV star from the madcap slapstick comedy romp of The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, where you could make the argument that in later years, the late Long John Baldry's portrayal of Dr. Ivo Robotnik became more iconic than him.
Snooping as usual, I see.
To the very dark and serious dystopian future in Sonic the Hedgehog, also known as SatAM, that has Sonic and his friends mounting a resistance cause against a very darker incarnation of Robotnik voiced by Jim Cummings, who is the type of voice you don't want to hear with the lights off.
Bring the dragon in.
This was also the first series where the character of Princess Sally Acorn was brought in as the heir to the throne of Mobius, voiced by the very talented and versatile Kathy Sose, whom you may remember as Lola Bunny from Space Jam and Phil and Lil from Rugrats, whom is adored by the fans who admire her spirit and being a well-rounded character and the subject of many fan art pieces. And then there was Sonic Underground. Okay, folks, we don't talk about that show. Ever. There have been other Sonic series since the 90s, from the very polarizing Sonic X from TMS Animation that was dubbed by 4Kids to mixed reception from fans and critics alike. And despite being a beloved star across multiple medias, he's never had a fully fledged movie. There was the Sonic OVA from ADV Films in 1999, but what people need to remember that this was a 2-episode OVA series from 1995. ADV only consolidated the 2 episodes into a dubbed movie because, presentation-wise, it looked better. There have been ideas and pitches for movies for years, ranging from Sonic coming into the human world from a Sega Saturn, and that would have dated the movie heavily if it had gone into production, to 2 pitches for a continuation of the SatAM Archie's continuity that would have either seen Sonic, Sally, and others fleeing into space after Mobius' destruction in Sonic Armageddon, to a 3-hour SatAM origin treatment akin to that of Lord of the Rings. There have been multiple movie adaptations of video game franchises for years, from 1993's Super Mario Bros. To Tomb Raider, House of the Dead, Blood Rain, and the very much maligned Resident Evil series, to most recently with the Detective Pikachu movie. I suppose it was a matter of timing for not only technology to catch up with being able to represent Sonic the way we wanted to see him, and to come up with the right story.
Meow?
Houston, we have a problem. Looking back on the original trailer, I can see what the producers were going for in trying to have him look more realistic so that people would buy the look in a live-action setting, as the mono-eye physically would just never work in a real-world setting. Also, the choice of Coolio's Gangsta's Paradise seems such a bizarre one. Sure, the song is great for an action setting, but is it Sonic? Double Toasted's Corey Coleman doesn't seem to think so.
Sonic is the last thing, the complete last thing you think about when you say gangster. You never in a million years, if I say gangster to you, what's gangster? We'll be dead before we ever get to Sonic.
So no.
Oh, wait, I know. Sonic.
You got it! And then I'm gonna kill you. Yeah. Super Mario's more gangster than Sonic. At least you could probably say he has ties to the Italian mob.
And then something unexpected happened. Jeff Fowler responded on Twitter and said they would take Sonic back to the drawing board, and in 2019, this was unheard of. A multi-million-dollar studio like Paramount delaying an $80 million picture until February 14th, 2020, and spent an additional $5 million on redesigning Sonic for the movie so that the people could be met halfway. And what we got was pretty balanced. There was still a sense of realism to the fastest thing alive with him having 2 eyes, but now he had a small portion of white fur between the base of his eyes that would be a link to his iconic design and keeping the fans happy. And with that fan base, that's a tall order. And as a nice bonus, they didn't need to do any reshoots. They just edited in the new design to what was already filmed. So after 2 years since his cinematic debut, how does it hold up? Well, let's grab the time stones as we revisit Sonic the Hedgehog. The story itself has a very simple premise. Sonic, who has been living in secret among humans for 10 years ever since being sent from his homeworld by his guardian Longclaw, has had to move again due to the EMP he caused at the baseball grounds that was detected by the government, and this is where we're introduced to Dr. Robotnik on the big screen, played by the legendary and energetic comic actor Jim Carrey. Sonic was supposed to go to a mushroom planet in order to prevent being discovered by the wrong hands that would likely use his powers for unsavory purposes, is inadvertently halted due to Tom Wachowski shooting him with a tranquilizer that was intended for a bear. Now, a lot of fans and critics have criticized the story for going with a road trip format for Sonic to retrieve his rings that have the power of interdimensional travel. I get that point, that the majority of the plot is focused on the road trip with Sonic and Tom, but keep in mind that Jeff Fowler was working with a tight budget. Sonic has to be one of the main central characters, and you wouldn't have much of a movie if it ended with Sonic just racing to San Francisco by himself when he didn't know where it was. The heart of the movie is the bonding between Sonic and Tom, where they start out at odds with each other and slowly develop this kingship between them that further develops into a surrogate father-son situation in which Tom looks out for Sonic. We don't get to see Sonic use too much of his powers and his capabilities, but what we have to keep in mind is that this is supposed to be an origin story and Sonic is only just starting to tap into his potential. So, naturally, he won't know his own strengths nor his speed at this point. He knows he can run fast, but how fast he can run is another story. Unsurprisingly, it's the material for Robotnik that steals the show for the movie, as the way Carrey acts out is what is basically Ace Ventura as Robotnik. Whether it's in the dance scene in which he's dancing to his holographic projector screen, to him piloting his tank remotely.
No, but thank you for asking.
Do you have your child in that bag?
No. I mean, yes, it's a child, but it's not mine.
Okay, really?
That's no good.
Yeah, given the age we live in now, that joke is really inappropriate. Had Tom had said he'd left his phone on speaker mode in the bag, then that might not have equally had as much comedic value, but it would have been less jarring and awkward. Also, if you have a sharp eye for detail, you will be able to spot multiple Easter eggs from most and all things Sonic over the course of his 30-year existence. From the Green Hills town sign, which is a nod to the first zone dating back to 1991. Had the sign population said 1,991 and not 1,981, then that would have had the reference complete. To the map of South Island from the Game Gear version of Sonic 1 with the Chaos Emerald on it, the emblem crest on Sonic's headband, Hilltop Zone on the table tennis table, to Chili Dogs as a nod to the early 90s cartoon where his fave snack was said item, and Gotta Go Fast as a nod to Sonic X, and Sonic, the really bad fan art from the internet. On the one hand, let's just be grateful that it wasn't Sonichu. The different iterations of the Green Hills Zone theme played at the baseball grounds and at the end of the movie, to Sonic having a racing car bed, which is a nod to the Archie comics, Ozzy being a nod to Mutsky from both Archie's and the pilot episode to Sat AM, the slide move from the Advanced series, and to his Smash Bros pose in the final battle with Robotnik in his Egomatic. I like the other important message that this taught about family and friendship, especially the way Tom and Maddie effectively adopted Sonic as their teenage hedgehog son. I would say the only trivial complaint I have about the movie is that it could have gone on for another 10 minutes, just to let some sequences breathe a little more, and maybe have some bonding between Sonic and Maddie. Granted, we would get that in the sequel, but that's for another time. The fact that the writers and the director himself were big fans of Sonic growing up and went to painstaking lengths to redesign the character after the initial design was revealed in summer 2019 to ending up with a wholesome family story that moved fans of all ages is how you do a video game movie origin story well. And the fact that at the ending we got a mid-credit scene where Tails enters the story setting up the sequel just left fans in awe and elation, knowing that more of the lore would be explored. When you consider that Sonic has been voiced by many voice actors over the course of 29 years when this movie came out, Schwartz had a lot to live up to. From Ryan Drummond to Jason Griffith to the current official voice actor in Roger Craig Smith to the OG himself, Jaleel White, who is considered by many to be the quintessential voice of the Hedgehog. What I like about Ben's performance is that he doesn't even try to mimic his predecessors in any way. Instead, he just uses a slightly higher pitch of Sonic if the character were in his early teens, which by the way he behaves in this would suggest that Sonic is either 13 or 14. In most iterations, Sonic is depicted as being anywhere from 15 to 17, depending on what continuity you follow. There are times where Sonic comes across as annoying, but what people forget about adolescence is that when kids are slowly transitioning to being adults and don't really know who they are completely, and are discovering themselves as they go. And I think Ben's portrayal does a more than decent job of an inexperienced Sonic at the beginning of his journey into becoming the character we all know and love today. It's interesting for once to see a human friend of a video game character not being a kid or a late teen character. James plays a friendly and approachable father figure in Tom that Sonic idolizes, referring to him as the Donut Lord for the way he keeps donuts in line. Since it's established that Sonic never had a father figure prior to coming to Earth as an infant, Tom is exactly what Sonic needed as someone to not only be a friend, but someone that would be the role model that he never had. Who would have thought that it would be playing the arch nemesis of the Blue Blur that we would see a resurgence of 90s Jim Carrey harking back to his Ace Ventura energy?
Ooh, look what came out of my egg sack.
Okay, Robotnik, I think I speak for everyone when I say, ew. This is the Jim Carrey we all love and remember from The Mask and Ace Ventura, with this wild and untamable eccentric energy that made you wonder what he would say next. To see him act over the top as Robotnik in a way we had never seen him portrayed before was very refreshing. Also, the song that he dances to the VR background in his semi by the Poppy Family, Where Evil Grows, more than likely became well known to this generation. Tika is just a delight to watch as Maddie. She comes across as competent, supportive, and sweet. She has great chemistry with James Marsden and is just a wonderfully light and bubbly figure. Honestly, this man is criminally underused in this movie when you consider the talent he is, from voicing Bruce Banner in the 90s Incredible Hulk animated series, to playing Dum Dum Dugan in 2011's Captain America: The First Avenger. Gary Chalk, who had voiced Grounder in The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog and Dr. Robotnik in Sonic Underground, has a cameo as the US Navy Chief of Staff. Colleen is the only artist to reprise her role from the video game series. Tails appears in a mid-credit scene looking for Sonic, and she's just as decent as before.
Gotta go fast.
Yeah, that was the general consensus of the internet. Okay, I'm going to be that guy a moment. From a realistic physics perspective, I get what the producers were going for in making Sonic somewhat more anatomically plausible in a real-world setting. It made sense for him to have two eyes as opposed to his classic mono eye design. Now, as a stylized animation design, it works because in an animated setting, you can have the suspension of disbelief and remind yourself that it's animation and just focus on the story and the characters. Jeff Fowler took to Twitter and said, "We hear you loud and clear, we're going to fix Sonic." And then, a few months later, we see this design where it's basically meeting people halfway. He still has two separate eyes, but it's met with a patch of white fur at the base, so it's looking like it's his classic mono eye design. The VFX for Sonic hold up for the most part, except for when Tom is carrying him out in his arms, where he looks like he's partially floating, as the green bag that James Marsden was holding in place of Sonic doesn't look like he's completely being held, for lack of a better description. And it has to be said, for a movie that was made for around $80 to $95 million, you wouldn't know. Jeff Fowler actually started out as an animator and was one of the animators for 2005's Shadow the Hedgehog, so he knows how to use the animation effectively where it needs to be. Now, it's not to say that we were expecting mind-blowing visual effects on the level of the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park or the photorealism of Tony Stark's Iron Man suit, but at the same time, you can find the same quality if you shop around. Moving Picture Company, Mars Animation Planet, Blur Studio, Trickster, and Digital Domain were all brought on for the visual effects. Mars Animation Planet had done CG animation for Sonic projects before, most notably Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Colors, and the 20th anniversary game, Sonic Generations. Tyson Hesse, who has been a part of a lot of Sonic media from Sonic's design in the IDW comic book series to Sonic Mania Adventures, was brought on to redesign Sonic to where he'd resemble his more familiar video game design and less human features. It should be noted that Hesse started out as a fan-based Sonic comic artist with somewhat caricature-styled Sonic comics. It just shows you that a passion and a hobby can lead you somewhere. Just like Primal Warrior Draco Azul, which you can find on Amazon and Comixology, that you can get as physical copies and for your Kindle. Written from the creative mind that is the esteemed Andres Perez. Is it just me or have I heard that name before? The green screen is done more than competently, and again this goes back to my argument of that if you shop around you can find the equipment and quality at a fraction of the price. Or you run the risk of ending up with dumpster fire articles like this. The rest of the VFX are done more than competently with the way Robotnik's drones react to their environments, to even the heat vapors they give off when you see one in particular hovering near the ground. So aside from some small discrepancies to how Sonic interacts with his environment, the effects are more than decent. I was not expecting the score to be this faithful to the source material. From the opening theme of Sonic Mania, Friends, by Hyperportions being played in the opening credits, to different renditions of the Green Hill Zone being played at the baseball ground, to the piano version at the end. What got me with the soundtrack was the sound style of Wiz Khalifa's Speed Me Up, where right from the word go, you hear the same drum beats from Sonic 2's Metropolis Zone. This felt like recording artists that got to work on a passion project they had been waiting for since they were kids. To hear Spin Dash and Best Friend in Tails warmed my heart and several other fans that have grown up with Sonic over the last 3 decades. Boom, by X-Ambassadors, did suit the Matrix-styled scene in which Sonic is basically aping what Quicksilver did in X-Men Days of Future Past by moving around the bar so quick. Tom Holkenberg, aka Junkie XL, has worked on high-profile movie projects ranging from Batman v Superman, Deadpool, and to the not-so-favoured Terminator Dark Fate, of which his score was one of the very few redeemable aspects of that train wreck. Holkenberg put a score together that felt like the gaming soundtracks that had been taken from the games and still very recognisable, but with more of a, for lack of a better term, orchestral treatment. As I've mentioned Green Hill before, take this piece at the baseball ground where you're seeing Sonic's perspective as a starry-eyed kid being able to marvel at his surroundings, and it takes you back to your childhood innocence in appreciating what he's seeing and feeling.
So cool.
In that same scene, he does something equally powerful. The tone of the score shifts when the realization hits Sonic that he is truly alone with no one to go to, and the score reflects this from going silent to this sad piece which then transforms into frustration and fear as he races around the field.
I really am alone. All alone. Forever.
The last piece before going to the end credits was so wholesome and heartwarming, with the music reflecting Sonic's overwhelming elation at being given a room as the contents of his cave had been transferred to the Wachowskis' attic, giving this warm family moment. The score was better than I dared imagine. As a fan, I can honestly say that no one could have done it better. Sonic the Hedgehog grossed a worldwide profit of $320 million against a budget of $85 to $90 million. Now, after only 2 years, that take-home profit would be worth $347.1 million. It was the 6th highest grossing film of 2020 and the highest grossing superhero film of the year, ending Marvel Studios' decade-long run of having the highest grossing film of the genre. It went on to top the box office with a $58 million debut over the 3-day weekend and $70 million over the 4, breaking Detective Pikachu's record for the biggest opening weekend by a video game-based film. It was also the 4th best President's Day holiday weekend and Jim Carrey's 2nd biggest opening weekend behind Bruce Almighty. The film was released in Japan on June 26, 2020 after being postponed from a previous March release due to the COVID-19 pandemic and debuted at number 6 that weekend. In China, the release was also postponed due to the pandemic, eventually receiving a July 31 date and underperforming at the Chinese box office due to new pandemic-related theatre policies there. So, it's fair to presume had the world event not hit, Sonic would have taken more money at the box office. Damie Lee of The Verge gave the film a positive review, praising the nostalgic elements seen in the film, writing that it shines when it remembers it's based on a video game and there's some genuinely fun stuff, like when Sonic uses his time-stopping powers or Robotnik's elaborate evil plotting montage that makes you wonder why more movies don't feature bad guys with choreographed dance sequences. Carrey plays up Robotnik as the cartoon villain he is, and it's a true delight to watch him in his element. The movie was also released onto DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K somewhat earlier than expected as a means of a distraction, so that Sonic could help people take their minds off of world events. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 followed into theaters in spring 2022, expanding on the lore of the character, now bringing in the Master Emerald and the cinematic debuts of Miles Tails Prower, Knuckles the Echidna, and the first ever live-action appearance of Super Sonic. And in February 2022, a 3rd movie was confirmed to be in development, with the biggest indication of the arrival of Shadow the Hedgehog, effectively signaling the adaptation, or at least major elements, of 2001's Sonic Adventure 2. Small favor, Jeff Fowler. If you bring in Amy Rose, please, not the Yondair version. We don't need to see that on the big screen. Ugh. That's nightmare fuel just thinking about it. Now I'm picturing Amy Rose as Ms. Nagatoro.
Hello, Sonic Senpai.
Stop that. Stop that right now. Since 2020, the movie has been enjoyed on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. I'm MJ Knight, and we went up, over, and gone for Sonic the Hedgehog.